Today we're going to talk about adding integers, and this is going to cover standard 7.3, model and solve problems involving computation with integers. When you add two integers, the sum of them can be positive, negative, or equal to 0. That all depends on what the signs are of the two integers that you're adding. So today we're going to look at adding integers with the same sign, adding integers with different signs, and then adding more than two integers. There are many ways to figure out the sum of two integers. One way is to use counters. You'll be seeing these counters a lot throughout the year, so it's important that you remember red represents negative numbers and yellow represents positive numbers. So whenever you see a red counter, it's going to represent a negative number, even if it doesn't have the negative sign on it. So adding with the same sign using counters. So this is very simple. It's a visual way to add two integers with the same sign. So we have -4 plus -3. You're going to place 4 negative counters and then add the 3 negative counters. Count them all up. That's going to give you 7. Since we have all negatives here, our answer is going to be -7. Another way that you can add two negative integers is to find the absolute value. So that we learned about absolute value in yesterday's lesson, so you can apply what you've already learned to solve this problem. First step is to add the absolute value of the integers, and then use the common sign for your answer. So first we're going to find the absolute value of -4, which is 4, and then we're going to find the absolute value of -3, which is 3. So remember, absolute value is the distance the number is from 0, and it's always positive. So now we have 4 plus 3, which equals 7. The next step is to use the common sign for your answer. So if we look back up here, what's the common sign with these two integers? Is it positive or negative? Well, it's negative. So our answer is going to be -7. The third way to add integers is to use a number line. This is another visual representation or strategy, and you will have to be able to use a number line to add two integers. So first thing is, whenever you're working with adding, subtracting, anything with two integers in a number line, you want to start at 0. So you're always going to start at 0. Look at whatever the first number is, which is -2. Since it's negative, we're going to go to the left 2 spaces. So 1, 2. We're at -2 now. Now we're going to add -4. Again, it's negative, so we're going to go left again, but now 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I arrive at my answer, which is -6. And if we go back to the absolute value for this question, if we find the absolute value of -2, that is 2. And if we find the absolute value of -4, that is 4, which equals 6. And you take the common sign, which is negative, and we're going to add that to our answer. Okay, now it's your turn to try the 3 strategies that we've used. You have 3 questions here to answer on your own. I would like you to use at least 2 of the strategies that I've just showed you. So whether it's finding the absolute value, using a number line, or using counters. I would like you to show your work and use at least 2 of those strategies. Okay, so we already talked about adding integers with the same sign using counters. Now we're going to talk about adding integers with different signs using the counters. So remember that the red counters are negative and the yellow counters are positive. So for this problem, we have 3 negative counters and 2 positive counters. And the way to solve this using the counters is going to be to match a positive, which would be yellow, with a negative, which is red. And the reason we're going to match them is because a positive and a negative are going to cancel each other out. So if we pair these up, it's going to leave us with 1 negative that's left over. And these would be crossed out because they're done and they're matched up. So I am left with 1 negative or red counter. And that is going to be the number 1 because there's 1 left. And we're going to put a negative sign in front of it because it's the red negative counter. Okay, adding with different signs and absolute value. So same as before, you're going to find the absolute value of each of the 2 integers. So the absolute value of 8 is 8, and the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. Next step is to subtract the less value from the greater absolute value. So the greater absolute value here is 10, so we're going to take 8 away from 10, which is going to give us 2. Last step is to use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. So if you look at which integer has the greater absolute value, it's 10. And what is the sign of 10 in this problem? So we're going to know right here, it's negative. So we're going to add a negative 2, or negative sign to the 2. So our answer is going to become negative 2. So again, if we go through the steps, first thing is step 1, you're going to find the absolute value. Step 2, you're going to subtract the less value from the greater value. So we did 10 minus 8 equals 2. That's step 2. Step 3 is to use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. And that was, we looked at that 10 was, and we looked here to see that it was negative. So step 3 is look at the sign of the larger number. The third way, again, is using a number line. So what number are we starting at? 0, because we're always going to start at 0 when we're working with number line. Since our first number in the equation is positive, we're going to move in the positive direction, which is to the right. 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I'm at positive 5. Then I'm going to add negative 3. So I'm adding a negative number. I'm going to walk now, or move in the direction towards the negative numbers 3 spaces. So I'm going to go back 1, 2, 3. And I end up at positive 2. For this example, we're going to come up with an equation that is represented by the number line. So I've given you a hint here, or I should say a reminder, that's telling you to start at 0. So if you start at 0, just here, which direction is it going? Left or right? It's going right, which means you're going in the positive direction. How many units do you go in the positive direction? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 units. So our first integer is going to be 7. plus, now I'm moving in the direction towards the negative numbers, and I'm starting at 7, and let's see how many I move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I move 10 towards the negative numbers, so I'm going to add negative 10, and my answer, I end up on negative 3. So this is a typical question that you'll see on tests throughout the year, where you'll be given a number line or the counters, and you'll have to write the equation that is shown. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about, and you should all remember this from last year, is the additive inverse property. So the sum of an integer and its additive inverse or opposite is 0. So the opposite of 6 is negative 6. The opposite of 5 is negative 5. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. So the sum means we're adding. You're going to add an integer and its inverse or its opposite. So 6 plus negative 6 equals 0. Negative 25 plus positive 25 equals 0. If I had negative 14 plus blank, and I wanted to know what its additive inverse would be, I know it would have to equal 0. So negative 14 plus what equals 0? Well, positive 14. Again, these are for you to do on your own. You're adding integers with different signs, the same signs, and more than 2 integers. Again, I would like you to use multiple ways or strategies that we've talked about in today's lesson to show your understanding. Important things to remember. This is the part where you need to make sure you have this information written down. If you're adding and it has the same sign, first find the absolute value of each integer and use the common sign. If you have different signs, you're going to find the absolute value, subtract the smaller number from the larger number, and then take the sign of the larger number. And the additive inverse property states that an integer plus its additive inverse or opposite needs to equal 0. Vocabulary for today: absolute value, positive and negative, where those numbers are on a number line, how they're represented with counters, so red counters are negative, yellow counters are positive, the additive inverse property, and that's it. Be sure to write down any questions that you may have in the last section on your worksheet, and I will see you in class tomorrow.